Just straight out, ideas being premiered here and getting legs and spreading. So, what next? Well, I think the road ahead's pretty clear. Not for the event necessarily, but for the people. If you have done 5 or 6 of these, let me give you some advice. I think you need to go to Europe. I think you need to think hard about attending Picnic in Amsterdam, LIFT Conference in Geneva, Future Everything in Manchester, Ars Electronica in Linz. It wouldn't hurt to go there. I know people are watching this on the web, streaming, whatever. People, ask them to go. Ask Austinites to go to your event. Ask South by Southwest people to go. Fly them over, feed them. It's worth it. It's become the world capital of the web. 4 days only, but temporary capital, but a real capital. No lie, it really is. There is no rival to what's going on here. So, even though I did have epic house parties, I'm not going to cry in my beer about those little domestic shindigs because they are well lost for an event, a happening of this size, scale, and importance. It's just very gratifying. And everyone involved should bathe in glory and go have a beer. So, now we come to the less pleasant part of my speech. The part where I get some issues off my chest. About a year's worth, usually. Because there aren't really many audiences to whom I can level, with the people at say, South by Southwest. And so, normally I don't talk much about politics. I'd much rather talk about technology or really cool ideas, but I think it's important to talk about politics. And it's very difficult to talk about politics because all the political language has been rendered toxic. It's just decades of culture war now have reduced all the nouns and verbs to rubble. So, it's either blood-sucking bankster moguls or socialists punishing success. And everybody in politics has learned how to deploy this kind of polarizing brand management. And the culture war there is just all over the place. The U.S. has a very bad case of this, but not the worst case in the world, because I've seen it worse, and we're going to get into that. So I'd like to talk about politics from the point of view of a design critic, really. Because I am a design critic. I mean, generally I criticize stuff that doesn't exist yet, because that's kind of a métier for me as somebody who's a futurist science fiction writer. Of course, I'm interested in things that have one foot in fantasy and maybe a toe in reality, stuff like augmented reality, generative art, design fiction. Things, are they good or bad? Are they interesting or boring? I don't know. Are they cool ideas? I mean, I spend a lot of time accumulating cool ideas. I'm a zealot for this. If you want cool ideas, like cool political ideas, techno-political, here you go. World Changing 2.0 is just out. It's great, it's got thousands of ideas, they're pretty sort of almost kind of practical, cool, out there, fabulous, well illustrated, beautifully designed, nifty keen, an endless parade of them. But, from the point of view of a critic, like a culture critic, I mean, are they really good ideas? I mean, it's not enough that there are huge numbers of them. Because, that's just kind of a sci-fi notebook approach. What you really need to have, critical success is pretty simple, and it's passionate virtuosity. And it took me a long time. I had to read a bunch of boring critical stuff to figure that out, but that's really what it's about, in the arts or design. It's passionate virtuosity, and what does that mean? Well, first you got to find somebody who really cares about what he's doing, and he's capable of higher than average performance. She is. And that would be passionate. And then they've got to be really, really capable of doing it. I mean, just sort of they've mastered the minutiae of it, and they're just kind of on top of their game, performance-wise, and that's virtuosity. So typically in a writer's career, or any creative person really, you got the opening period where they're super passionate and just kind of full of burning things to do, and sometimes they actually set fire to stuff, whatever, wild rebels, kind of, eager, hard-charging kind of youth fervor there, and Then at the end of their career, they're very much masters of their field, but they don't really feel like doing much. You know, they found their favorite easy chair and they like to make wisecracks about younger people. And somewhere in the middle of there is passion and virtuosity, where they still really want to do it, and they've got some kind of burning energy and need and motivation, and they're also really great at it, and this is the sort of the works that are kind of the peak in their whatever. Okay, well, you know, the ideas in this thing kind of lack virtuosity because they're speculative, and they're not gone into in great detail. So although there's kind of a lot of passion in the book, it lacks people who have been able to pick it up and deploy it. Now, but if the ideas and approaches and tools in this book were actually deployed in our society would improve radically and it would be better by almost every metric. But we're not getting there because we don't have the political will. And we also don't have the organizational skill, and also we've just got a series of problems that are poorly recognized. You know, the passage of time turns cyberpunks into design professors, or, you know, in the case of my pal Rudy Rucker, a mathematics professor, and we end up practicing a lot of attention, philanthropy, bringing attention to stuff as critics rather than creatives, teaching in design school rather than design stuff, so forth and so on. Politically, in our society, we don't have any passionate virtuosity. And if you look at it objectively, our political situation would be kind of a polar opposite of passionate virtuosity. If there was like a term for that, maybe like disgusted incompetence would be a good term for what's going on. So I want to try and illustrate this, and I'm going to illustrate it by talking about Dr. Venter, because he was here and he made what I thought was a very lucid presentation about his means, motives, and opportunities. And I very much admire the clarity with which he put that across. But I happened to go to Washington recently to meet some policy makers and futurians and such, where we were discussing the implications of Dr. Venter's work. So he was talking about the President's Council of Bioethics and their recent release of a tome on synthetic biology and his plans and schemes to remake microbes. And I'm probably one of, I don't know, half a dozen guys, maybe fewer, of the people in this room who've actually read that book. And what I want to ask is, like, why was the guy here? And I'm going to try to explain why he chose to come to South by Southwest and what benefit it is he expects to gain. And it's not because you're cute. He's here because he's trying to reframe 20th century genetic engineering as 21st century synthetic biology. And that's a political reframing maneuver. And he has a guy who's sort of a collaborator, lieutenant. I'd urge you to look this guy up. I met him, I talked to him, super interesting figure. His name is Drew Endy. One of your basic multi-lobe brain MIT kind of guys. He's an engineer. And he runs this thing called iGEM, which is a really beautiful work of social network design in which he gets people around the world, specifically high school students in different countries, to practice synthetic biology, putting working parts of cells, introducing foreign DNA into cells. And it's really clever of him to make this a kind of high school science project, because that really brought it in under the radar. And there are now teams of these teenage genetic engineers all over the world. And it really just sort of left-flanked the very strong political opposition to genetic engineering, especially in Europe, where genetic modified organisms is like a synonym for frankenfood. This is a very difficult political path to tread, and I really admire the skill and determination in which they have carried this off. It's fantastic, really. So, I read this report of the President's Council on Bioethics, and I had to compare it to like the mayhem, or really, not the mayhem, but the sort of intense political debate that surrounded this in the 1970s and 1980s, because I'm old enough to remember that. And when that first happened, this kind of idea of introducing DNA into organisms, people were like morally frightened by it. They recognized a lot of the legal, moral, ethical, and social implications. I mean, people espoused this idea. Interest groups sprang up all over the place. There were all kinds of debates about it, in the Senate and the House of Representatives, within the councils of science all over the world. There was a unilateral kind of disarmament among the scientists of the world. And then you look at this reaction to synthetic biology, and it's just so flaccid and helpless and beside the point. I mean, the single most important recognition in that document is that microbes are not baby seals. You can do anything you want to a microbe, and no hippie will ever show up with a protest sign, No right-winger will care, because, microbes aren't in the Bible. It's the truth. So from the point of view of right and left, there's just no way for them to get any traction. It's like, they're too small to see, they must not matter. Okay, if you're a DNA engineer, you can look at the productivity of these things. They multiply billions of times. Cynthia, this fake cell that Dr. Venner and his colleagues cobbled up out of nothing, has already replicated 1 billion times. If you want genes, if you want DNA to express, you don't want goats or super babies or, identical cloned lambs. Of course you want giant, productive heaps of yeast, bacillus, Escherichia coli, whatever, and they've got that. And not only does he have it, he's got ExxonMobil giving him $600 million to carry that off. He needed the money. He got the money. ExxonMobil, okay, he makes no bones about global warming. He went to great pains to point that out, that his techniques may in fact suck carbon out of the air and, avert or at least delay a colossal calamity. That ExxonMobil has just spent 3 decades lying to us about it. All the time. These guys are the personification of corporate evil. In the world today, ExxonMobil, if anybody's board of directors belongs in prison for crimes against humanity, it's these guys. They didn't force us to put a tiger in our tank. But the tiger they unleashed with these emissions, like 8 Brisbane this year. And they're not the only malefactors, they're just the best politically connected. And he's making them pay Weir Guild for that. It's an allegiance between these malefactors and this visionary. The blood of drowned and parched and starving people is going to be on the hands of those guys in that organization and their fellow travelers on K Street and around Washington, D.C. It's just a fact. Nobody can say it out loud. Here, yeah. In every area where they control the means of expression, hell no. Just look at H.B. Gary. If you want an example of the kind of guys, you're hackers, okay? You don't care about this, but I bet you care plenty about WikiLeaks and Anonymous. Go look what Anonymous revealed out of these things from H.B. Gary. These guys were sitting there with heaps of sock puppets attacking free expression for their corporate masters and denying global warming, by the way, because that's what pays these cyber war mercenaries. Now, if we had it together, the population would give the guy $600 million. We'd be in the streets demanding that he be funded. And then we'd watch him like a rock star everywhere he went. We'd know about his girlfriend, his boyfriend, and whatever. We'd just be on top of this because we had it together as a society to recognize our best interests and carry it out politically. If Texans understood this, they'd be in the street for wind power right now. Oil's at $3.25 a barrel and 2 nuclear power plants just caught fire. And people do freaking nothing about it. You could go out there and make your relatives in West Texas rich over this. Texas has fantastic wind power. Nobody gets out of their seat to do a damn thing about it. Where is the popular pressure for this? Why aren't social networks abuzz with this? Why don't you take it to the streets and paralyze Austin, Madison, Wisconsin style? Because that's your sister city and they're coming for you, ladies and gentlemen. They're coming for you. Get ready. Okay, J. Craig Benner. I have no quarrel with this gentleman. He's a force of nature, all right? I wouldn't get in his way any more than I would interfere with Edison, Ford, Rockefeller, or Steve Jobs. You know, let J. Craig be J. Craig. That's my philosophy. He's very clear and upfront about what he wants to do. He uses your hacker chops, your digital technology, and your rhetoric to get his way for an extremely alien technology that you might not approve of otherwise. That's why he was here. Because he's willing to win ugly, unlike you. I was in this place. It happened to be Google's corporate headquarters, their lobby headquarters in Washington, watching people exquisitely well-informed, brilliantly educated, Washington mandarins, people from industry and government, as if there's a difference anymore. And they were discussing, you know, the potential implications of this thing. And their air of utter helplessness and detachment was shocking to me. I mean, really, 15-year-old kids from Cairo could have kicked these guys to the curb. They could have taken their lunch money. That's how ineffectual they were. And God help them if that building caught fire. They would issue a white paper before the evacuation. So, you know, that's pretty bad. But I want to talk about something worse.